FSR 4.1 is finally available for RDNA 3 RX 7000 series GPUs. Hallelujah, you can finally throw FSR 3.1 into the trash. Finally. Today I'm going to be looking at how good this feature is. I've tested the official FSR 4.1 release for RDNA 3. I'm going to compare it to FSR 3.1 to explore the transformative upgrade you're getting. I'm going to compare it to FSR 4.1 on RDNA 4 to see if AMD have downgraded their upscaler in any way, and of course, we'll show some blue performance bar graphs. This whole situation with FSR 4 on RDNA 3 has been bizarre from the start. AMD first launched FSR 4 as an exclusive new AI-based upscaling technology for their new RDNA 4 architecture at the start of 2025. AMD said that FSR 4 was built to use FP8 instructions, and because FP8 is only supported in RDNA 4, FSR 4 would not be available on older architectures. It seemed for a while that all hope of better upscaling on RDNA 3 was lost. Those GPU owners would be stuck using crappy FSR 3.1, which, if you've ever tried to use it at 1440p, it is pretty bad. But then AMD did an oopsie. They accidentally released FSR 4's full source code in August 2025, and hidden away in there was a version of FSR 4 built to use int8 instructions instead of FP8. A glimmer of hope. RDNA 3 and RDNA 2 support int8 instructions, so maybe FSR 4 can actually work on older GPUs. And we confirmed that this was the case in October when we tested this leaked version. It worked just fine on RDNA 3 and provided a huge improvement over FSR 3.1. Naturally, after this revelation, AMD immediately released FSR 4 for all RDNA 3 owners. I certainly never had to make multiple videos blasting AMD about not releasing it, and everyone lived happily ever after. Back in the real world, AMD of course did not do that. They sat on the int8 version for months and months as hope of FSR 4 on RDNA 3 slipped away once again. More months passed. It really looked like it would never happen. And then, AMD announces it's actually coming, and it's coming in July. Turns out it would actually be slightly earlier than that, and here we are today. It's available right now in the latest 26.6.2 driver update. In fact, if you're an owner of an RX 7000 series graphics card, all you need to do to get FSR 4.1 working is install the driver. The driver override that converts FSR 3.1 game integrations into FSR 4.1 is enabled by default. From there, so long as you have FSR enabled in the game, you'll get the FSR 4.1 int8 experience. It's just as seamless as on an RDNA 4 GPU, and with that, I should get into the testing after this.
Today's video is brought to you by Ugreen and Honkai Star Rail collectible gift box. This complete charging kit is inspired by the new S-tier character Yao Guang, combining premium products with a unique visual aesthetic for a custom desk setup or travel companion. This box is packed with Ugreen products including a magnetic power bank, 65-watt charger, retractable cable, FineTrack Apple-compatible tracker, and themed collectible accessories. The MagFlow Air magnetic power bank is ultra slim and features Qi 2 15-watt fast wireless charging with a 10,000 mAh capacity, which also has a handy built-in Type-C cable. The Nexode Air 65-watt charger is a pocket-sized fast charger featuring a foldable plug, compact size, and Type-C output. All of these items also fit neatly into the included travel case. As an upgrade, you can opt for the Nexode Pro power bank, which offers 45-watt of power output, and a smart display for real-time battery monitoring. For more information and the chance to win a gold collectible, please check the links in the video description.
Firstly, I want to explore the image quality improvement that RDNA 3 owners are receiving with the upgrade from FSR 3.1 to FSR 4.1. It's no secret at this point that FSR 3.1 sucks. It's not competitive with modern AI-based upscaling solutions, and the output image quality is very unimpressive, especially at lower resolutions or lower quality modes. In some situations, I think FSR 3.1 looks so bad that it's basically unusable, and to make matters worse, often in those very same situations, DLSS actually is usable. Needless to say, the upgrade from FSR 3.1 to FSR 4.1 is enormous. It's hard to overstate how massive of an improvement this is. The int8 version of FSR 4.1 for RDNA 3 absolutely destroys FSR 3.1 in image quality. I would say this is the single biggest software upgrade AMD has ever delivered to Radeon gamers after the launch of a product. It's transformative, breathing new life into prior generation GPUs. In these comparisons, I've pitted FSR 4.1 int 8 using the 4K performance mode up against FSR 3.1 at 4K in both the quality and performance modes. It's hard to know where to begin when describing the issues with FSR 3.1 that are fixed or improved in FSR 4.1. I guess one area is blur. FSR 4.1 is way sharper and way less blurry than 3.1, especially when comparing the performance modes. In every example, this was immediately noticeable. FSR 4.1 upscaling from 1080p to 4K actually looks like a 4K image, whereas FSR 3.1 is clearly giving you something that appears lower than 4K in resolution. And this sharpness improvement is not from a sharpening pass or sharpness slider. All examples have the same sharpness settings. This improvement is purely down to the upscaler better handling input data to preserve detail. The other main advantage is that FSR 4.1 int 8 is significantly more stable. FSR 3.1 has tons of issues with edge stability. It's common to see sizzling, shimmering, aliasing, or other stability artifacts both when stationary and in motion. FSR 4.1 cleans up a significant number of these problems, giving you a much more consistent, stable image. The improvement is so drastic that in most cases, FSR 4.1 using the performance mode is actually significantly more stable than FSR 3.1 using the quality mode. Just take a look at how FSR 4.1 handles the wood texture in Mafia in this example. FSR 4.1 performance easily beats FSR 3.1 quality, and the same can be said for this example in Ratchet & Clank. I'm not even moving, and we see improvements to the stability of the confetti on the ground in Ratchet's fur and in Clank's fine line detail. There are some specific things that FSR 3.1 does a really poor job of. One is foliage, which is overhauled so significantly in FSR 4.1 that you will never want to use FSR 3.1 ever again. Here in Assassin's Creed Shadows, the tall grass in the foreground is a blurry, horrible mess with FSR 3.1, even using the highest quality mode at 4K. When using FSR 4.1 at a much lower render resolution in the performance mode, the grass is significantly clearer, more detailed, more stable, and better looking. You can see similar here in Star Wars Outlaws. FSR 3.1 is so grainy and low detail compared to FSR 4.1 int 8, this straight up looks like a resolution improvement when using FSR 4.1, even though we're actually either keeping the resolution the same, comparing performance versus performance, or reducing the resolution, comparing quality versus performance. In this Mafia example, shimmering is significantly reduced using FSR 4.1, and stability increases as a result, leading to a much nicer image. Water is improved noticeably here in Assassin's Creed Shadows. The water quality is poor and pixelated using FSR 3.1 performance compared to FSR 4.1. Fence quality is improved. FSR 4.1 is providing obviously better stability here in this tricky test. Particle quality is night and day different. FSR 4.1 absolutely smokes FSR 3.1 in this Horizon Zero Dawn snow test, even comparing the performance mode to the quality mode. FSR 3.1 is actually so bad here, it's kind of funny. Transparent effects are hugely improved as well, which we can see viewing this fire effect in Horizon and some of the holograms in Ratchet & Clank. Disocclusion is far better with FSR 4.1 as well, which you can see in this example from The Last of Us Part 1. At no point did I find an example where FSR 4.1 is a downgrade on FSR 3.1 using the same mode. In fact, it's the complete opposite. FSR 4.1 provides a clear improvement every single time. As you've seen throughout a lot of these examples, I also generally believe that FSR 4.1 performance mode at 4K delivers much better image quality than FSR 3.1 using the quality mode. It's sharper, more detailed, and more stable in most scenes. However, there are some edge cases where the lower render resolution does lead to more artifacts in FSR 4.1. In this example, fine rope detail is more stable using FSR 3.1 quality versus FSR 4.1 performance. However, performance versus performance is a clear win to FSR 4.1, and 4.1 is better than both configurations in most other areas. The improvements are even larger at 1440p. If you're a 1440p gamer, the FSR 4.1 int 8 update is transformative, whether you have been using upscaling or not. If you've previously used FSR 3.1 quality mode on RDNA 3, FSR 4.1 int 8 is a humongous quality improvement. If you haven't been using FSR 3.1 previously at 1440p because the quality is so bad, FSR 4.1 might actually be worth exploring. The quality mode is highly usable, and even bounced is good enough in a lot of situations. In the vast majority of cases I looked at, FSR 4.1 balanced mode is significantly better than FSR 3.1 quality mode at 1440p. FSR 3.1 is just so blurry at this resolution to the point where you can actually reduce the render resolution using FSR 4.1 and gain a significant amount of sharpness and detail. Not to mention all the other benefits in terms of stability and artifact reduction. All RDNA 3 gamers would obviously want to use FSR 4.1 here, and it's why many have been crying out for AMD to officially support them. Here's a few more examples of what FSR 4.1 can do at 1440p. I don't even feel the need to show the quality mode, which I suspect most people will use instead of balanced, because it's a clear victory to the lower mode anyway. If you don't use an RDNA 3 GPU yourself and you aren't going to experience this transformation from FSR 3.1 to FSR 4.1, at least I hope these examples have shown why I've been so strong on AMD needing to release this feature. The second main question concerns FSR 4.1 on RDNA 3 versus FSR 4.1 on RDNA 4. how close does the Int8 version get to the original FP8 version? Are there any noticeable cutbacks or changes in image quality? To answer that, let's explore the 4K performance mode for both versions, and I'm also including DLSS 4.5 preset L using the performance mode just so you can see how NVIDIA's upscaler compares. With a 1080p render resolution and a 4K output resolution, I think the two versions of FSR 4.1 are virtually identical. I looked closely at 21 different examples across 9 games and found it very difficult to split the Int8 and FP8 versions. Standing still, in motion, different types of effects on screen, they basically look the same, and I'm very sensitive to differences in image quality. I've made dozens of these sorts of videos. I love to zoom and nitpick. As far as I can tell, the output of FSR 4.1 at 4K is the same whether you use the version for RDNA 4 or RDNA 3, at least with the performance mode or better. When you look at a lot of upscalers, over time you get a sort of feel for how each technology works and the sorts of outputs and artifacts they produce. Immediately it was clear from testing FSR 4.1 Int8 that the AI upscaling model AMD are using is the same or virtually identical to the FP8 version. This isn't a situation like with Intel's XeSS, where they use a higher quality and more complex model for the XMX version that runs on Intel GPUs, and a lower quality, simpler model for the DP4A version that runs on other GPUs. RDNA 3 owners appear to be getting the full FSR 4.1 experience. And you can see this in action when we focus on some of the artifacts. Here in Cyberpunk, we've got this thin spire at the top of the screen. It flickers in the exact same way in the Int8 and FP8 versions. In Ratchet & Clank, we can look at the textures on the ground, identical sharpness and level of detail. In Horizon Zero Dawn, we see both upscalers handling Aloy's hair in the same way, and also handling the grass with the same level of output quality. I didn't see any notable differences in the Mafia boat rigging test. This is a really challenging test for upscalers, and the sorts of sizzle and flicker seen in both FSR 4.1 versions is close to identical. The trees and grass in Star Wars Outlaws look very similar, with effectively identical clarity in the moving foliage, similar levels of grain, similar reconstruction capabilities. Spider-Man 2 overlapping fences test, no clear winner, no clear differences. Both versions of FSR 4.1 handle this element in the same way. Disocclusion seems to be managed in the same way. Looking at this example from The Last of Us Part 1, no major differences between the versions. And then in Mafia with the speedy foliage test, a tricky one for resolving grass detail in motion that can be prone to blur and sizzling. Again, both versions look basically the same. In fact, if we pause and zoom in on the grass, it doesn't really look like there's any noticeable difference or downgrade at all. The level of ghosting in scenes where I saw ghosting seemed very similar between the versions as well. I also looked at 1440p using the balanced mode, which has an even lower render resolution and is typically a trickier test for upscalers than the performance mode at 4K. We're looking at a roughly 850p render resolution compared to 1080p. Broadly speaking, I saw the same thing as at 4K, where FSR 4.1 Int8 and FSR 4.1 FP8 look essentially identical. I did find a couple of edge cases though, where the Int8 version wasn't quite as good as the FP8 version, which has me questioning whether the two algorithms work in exactly the same way or whether the Int8 version has been slightly simplified for performance reasons. In the Mafia boat rigging test, the Int8 version had blurrier ropes in motion. It just wasn't able to handle this element as well without producing artifacts. I saw a similar slight reduction in quality looking at the wires on this water tower in The Last of Us, which is part of a cutscene, so there's no differences that can be attributed to small changes in the test capture run. There's a couple of these sorts of things that pop up, but on the whole, I'm talking about pretty minor differences. In other tricky tests like this Assassin's Creed Shadows Foliage example, there was no notable difference between the Int8 and FP8 versions, despite using the 1440p balanced mode here. In this Cyberpunk 2077 run in motion, I think you'd find it really difficult to spot any differences between the versions, and even looking at it closely, slowed down, zoomed in, there was nothing major that stood out to me that would say the Int8 version is a noticeable or significant downgrade. At worst, across all the examples I looked at, the Int8 version might be slightly worse in edge cases at lower render resolutions, but broadly speaking, the two versions are the same, and I think most people would not be able to tell the difference at all in typical gameplay scenarios. The differences are certainly smaller and harder to notice than if we compare, say, the two DLSS 4.5 models, preset L and M. Now let's talk about performance. I'm only going to look at a few games here, the first of which is by far the most taxing, Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K using the Ray Tracing Ultra preset. In this configuration, which runs at a relatively low frame rate, FSR 4.1 Int8 on the Radeon RX 7900 XTX is slightly more taxing than FSR 3.1. The quality mode delivers an 82% uplift over native rendering with FSR 4.1 compared to 92% using FSR 3.1. In the performance mode, we're looking at 168% more performance compared to 200% more with FSR 3.1. Essentially, using the newer and better upscaler is costing a couple of extra frames. In this same game, running on the RX 9070 XT with FSR 4.1's full FP8 version, the performance uplift is slightly higher, 86% for the quality mode and 176% for the performance mode. This is from a higher baseline FPS, as the 9070 XT is faster than the 7900 XTX in this title. In Mafia the Old Country, we get a better look at upscaling in a more typical setup. On the 7900 XTX and 9070 XT, baseline FPS with native TAA is around 36 FPS at 4K, so the sort of results where you'd want to use upscaling. Using the quality mode, FSR 4.1 increases FPS by 52% on the 7900 XTX compared to 70% using FSR 3.1. The 9070 XT sees a 68% boost from FSR 4.1, which is more in line with FSR 3.1 on the 7900 XTX, so it's definitely running faster on the newer architecture. Using the performance mode, we see an 83% uplift for FSR 4.1 on the 7900 XTX, 114% using FSR 3.1, and 108% using FSR 4.1 on RDNA 4. While FSR 4.1 Int8 isn't providing the same sort of performance output as FSR 3.1 on RDNA 3, it's actually a significant win overall, given the quality difference. In my opinion, FSR 4.1 performance mode typically looks much better than FSR 3.1 quality mode. In this example, you're getting 66 FPS with FSR 4.1 performance versus 61 FPS using FSR 3.1 quality, with a sizable boost to image quality. That's a clear net win for FSR 4.1, but it's not as good as the result on the 9070 XT, where FSR 4.1 performance mode runs at 73 FPS on average. Then we have the results in Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, a game that doesn't benefit as much from upscaling. Here the performance overhead of FSR 4.1 is more noticeable. On the 7900 XTX, the quality mode only provided a 9% FPS increase compared to native, whereas FSR 3.1 was 29% faster. The performance mode in this game ran slower than FSR 3.1's quality mode, and once again, we see the 9070 XT running FSR 4.1 FP8 faster. But even in this worst case scenario for performance, I'd still use FSR 4.1 on the RDNA 3 card. It's just not worth dealing with those FSR 3.1 artifacts to gain extra FPS. And to be honest, the performance uplift that we're seeing here from FSR 4.1 on RDNA 3 is pretty similar to what you'd see from using DLSS 4.5, the very latest models on an RTX 40 series GPU. So that's not too bad either. Overall, the release of the FSR 4.1 Int8 version is a massive win for RDNA 3 gamers. This completely transforms the upscaling experience on RX 7000 series GPUs, breathing new life into the now 3.5-year-old products. It's an especially big win in a world where graphics card upgrades are unreasonable and unaffordable. FSR 4.1 will keep these GPUs running games at acceptable image quality and frame rates for longer. This win is achieved on multiple levels. FSR 4.1 delivers much better image quality than FSR 3.1 while maintaining decent frame rates. It also looks almost identical to the FSR 4.1 FP8 version you get on RDNA 4. FSR 4.1 Int8 is heavier to run on RDNA 3 versus FSR 4.1 FP8 on RDNA 4, so you don't get as much of a performance uplift when upscaling. But the upscaling model has not been downgraded to any substantial degree to get working on RDNA 3. This keeps the output quality at a high level and means FSR 4.1 is an overall net win. At the same performance level, FSR 4.1 simply looks much better than FSR 3.1. Because FSR 4.1 Int8 looks so similar to the FP8 version, if you want to learn more about how this upscaler compares to DLSS, you can check out all of our previous coverage. I think the latest DLSS 4.5 models are still superior, but FSR 4.1 is reasonably competitive and quite usable at lower modes and resolutions. I'd actually recommend using it at 1440p, unlike with FSR 3.1. This significantly closes the gap in capabilities between the RX 7000 series and Nvidia's RTX 40 series that was released around the same time. While this release is undoubtedly a good thing, I do have to bring up once again that AMD took far too long to release FSR 4 for RDNA 3 owners. It actually took an embarrassing amount of time when you compare AMD to Nvidia. So with Nvidia, the RTX 40 series was released in October 2022, shortly before AMD's RX 7000 series. Upon launch, you could already use DLSS 2.0 era upscaling based on the original CNN model. Nvidia continued to work on DLSS over time, with newer releases and DLLs providing small quality improvements. Then, at the start of 2025, along with the launch of the RTX 50 series, Nvidia released DLSS 4.0 with first-gen transformer model upscaling. This was made available simultaneously day one on not just the RTX 50 series, but the 40 series and even the 30 and 20 series. Nvidia would go on to repeat day one upscaling support for older architectures when they released DLSS 4.5 at the start of 2026. Essentially, 40 series owners have gotten all the DLSS upscaling improvements day one as they have become available. With AMD, firstly, RX 7000 series buyers did not have access to an upscaling solution on par with DLSS 2.0 or 3.0 at launch. They were stuck using FSR 2 technology, which received minor updates to FSR 3.1 in 2024. Then, when AMD released FSR 4 in early 2025, AMD did not release this technology for older architectures. It was exclusive to RDNA 4. It would take a further 15 months for AMD to release a version of FSR 4 that would work on GPUs released just a couple of years ago. RX 7000 series buyers have essentially been burned twice here. We now know that high-quality upscaling was actually possible on the RDNA 3 architecture all along, despite having weaker AI hardware capabilities than RTX GPUs and future AMD cards. Theoretically, AMD could have offered some sort of upscaler better than FSR 2.2 for RDNA 3 owners at launch, but they didn't invest the time or resources to do so. That stings when RTX 40 buyers got access to DLSS straight away. The second burn came when AMD did eventually release a better upscaler. Instead of AMD working hard to make this feature work across multiple generations of GPU, which again, we now know is possible, they opted to focus on RDNA 4 only. RX 7000 series buyers wouldn't see official FSR 4 support for another year, and that's despite AMD accidentally revealing to everyone a version of FSR 4 that worked on RDNA 3 last year. That stings when all new DLSS upscaler releases have been available for RTX 40 buyers day one. AMD simply hasn't done a good enough job of supporting their existing Radeon GPU customers with software updates and new features. Gamers actually care about this stuff. They want reliable and consistent driver updates and new feature support where feasible. Nvidia has been looking after their GeForce customers quite well with the DLSS feature stack. AMD have not done the same with FSR. It hurts the brand if you take 15 months to bring crucial features to people that bought products relatively recently, while your direct competitor is bringing their features day one. Across the last 3 years, AMD needed to invest more in the software side of their GPUs. Better upscaling should have been possible on RDNA 3 sooner than now. Hopefully, now that AMD have finally realized that you actually do need to support old architectures for a long time, we see a decent level of ongoing support. Now, I'm not holding my breath for that. We know AMD does AMD things, but the long-awaited official release of FSR 4.1 Int 8, which for a while there looked like it would never be released, is definitely a step in the right direction. So anyway, that's it for this analysis of the official release of FSR 4.1 Int 8 for RDNA 3 GPUs. We are also expecting FSR 4.1 Int 8 to be released for RDNA 2, but AMD has said that that is not going to be coming until 2027. So we'll see how that goes when that's finally released. We will, of course, test it next year. But for now, unfortunately, it's a bit of a waiting game for those of you on RDNA 2. If you do want to support Hardware Unboxed and the independent testing that we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some cool benefits like a Discord community, monthly live streams, and behind the scenes content. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.